How might the Winnipeg Jets' plans change if they actually acquire the second overall pick? Let's chat about that.
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the #1 sports podcast network. I am your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. Thanks for joining us on tonight's show. Obviously, yesterday, some big rumors circulating around the Jets potentially being interested in trading up for second overall. The source, David Pagnotta, little suspicious at times. We all know that his hit and miss ratio is not in his favor, but when it comes to Pacific Division teams, he usually has a little more insight than he does on most other teams, which makes this a very interesting shout, linking the Sharks and Jets on a potential deal. Now, I don't think this is likely, but let's chat through what happens if the Jets do acquire second overall. How does their entire draft and plan for the future change? Want to talk through that, as well as the Pagnotta framing on the Heli trade, which he says maybe takes a little bit of time to gain steam, and also preview the conference finals for the playoffs. We're just about to round 3. Before we do, though, did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app right now because new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. Now, like I said, 2 overall is a pretty big freaking deal. For a lot of reasons, this was one of the picks we all were dreaming of. When you look at the Sharks, right, why would they ever trade second overall? Well, if they were guaranteed to get, Josh Morrissey and, say, 8th overall in return, and they send back, say, Eklund and the second, when you look at Stenberg, he is a franchise-level talent, zero question. But in terms of what the Sharks roster is like, Stenberg doesn't necessarily fill every single gap for them. He's a very, very, very talented player, but they have such a good forward core already. What the Sharks really need is a strong defense. And if you were to move back and trade one of your excess forwards, who's certainly a good young player, but maybe not part of your elite core, you could potentially walk away not only with a Norris caliber defenseman in Morrissey, who can kind of man your blue line over the next couple of seasons and be one of those cornerstone veteran leaders for a team that's very young. You also have the 8th overall pick, which gives you a very good shot at getting a Schmitz, maybe a Veerhoff, one of these top-level young defensive prospects, some of whom might be able to step into the Sharks lineup almost immediately. So, I think that was an interesting point somebody made. Why would they give up, that Stenberg on an ELC? Well, it's because the cumulative value of Morrissey plus 8th overall in what you're giving up might end up being a good exchange. Maybe there's some other pieces involved on both ends of this deal, but that's something that could happen, right? If you're the Jets, your plans will definitely change course, right? At this point, the reason you're doing this is probably because Heli has made his choice. The Jets need to be aggressive about the future, and so they're trying to acquire futures right now for this draft that's very good when they still have assets that have a fair bit of value. They can sell high. They can afford to do that. I've gotten some pushback from friends that, second overall plus Eklund for Morrissey and 8 isn't really good value and bad asset management. And I disagree, to be honest. I think, despite there being a lot of fluidity in the draft rankings, for the Jets, second overall is a transformative pick for this team. And especially with where I kind of see these talent tiers being, you have a shot at either Stenberg, McKenna, or perhaps Caleb Malhotra. And any of those 3 would be a coup for this Jets team, right? We know that the Jets can't really attract a lot of free agent talent. We know that they have trouble getting people to waive. So you have to approach things really through the draft. And we know that the Jets haven't been, necessarily in lottery territory the last few years, anything but. Now that they're kind of moving into this new phase, say Hellebuck goes, you're going to be entering that territory a lot more frequently. But you have to wait each season to get one pick per year in the first round. Adding another first rounder, especially a lottery pick this year, helps accelerate the Jets' prospect pool and gets them perhaps on a more favorable timeline if you think that they can turn things around in the next 3 to 4 years. That is a long time in some ways, but from the Jets' perspective, right, if you're starting the process of kind of moving players out, that might be a realistic scenario and framework to work with. You have, the pick of the litter when it comes to forwards. You could take Malhotra, which Vancouver will probably stab you for, but you'd get one of the top young centers in the entire draft. Then, if you're moving Hellebuyck for, say, 9th overall, you can add another center. You could bring in Bjork. You could bring in Lawrence. You could acquire a defenseman. You could do that. I mean, you really have the world at your feet with these kinds of moves. And I think for the Jets, a team that really has a good aging core, but one that maybe doesn't suit Winnipeg's needs in the short and long term, this is your chance to really reassess how you want to build this team. If you trade Hellebuyck, all bets are off, right? That is kind of the point at which you now have the freedom and flexibility to do whatever you think is going to help shape the future of this team. And maybe this move has to happen to give Winnipeg more balance. You look at a lot of the cup contenders out there, none of them really have elite goalies. Most of the elite goalies are already out of the playoffs. They might have some decent ones in the postseason, but most of these teams are built from top to bottom. They're not built from the net out. And I think that might be a little bit of a cautionary tale for the Jets on what they need to do to reach that level. Focus on the skaters, raise your offensive ceiling, go from there. You can get away with a really good but maybe not amazing goalie. Now, if you're a team that's looking to acquire a Hellebuyck, it might be because you're already on this, on this pathway of being an elite contender, but adding a Hellebuyck just adds a level of insurance beyond that, and you have the assets to make it happen. So there's kind of some mutual stuff here, but from Winnipeg's perspective, they're not going to be concerned about that, because if they start this process of a rebuild, that does mean that they start to acquire more young players, and it pushes their timeline past some of these cores that they'd be fighting. So, I think for where the Jets are and for where the rest of the league is, this is probably about as ideal of a time as it gets to start rebuilding. You can maybe wait out some of these young teams that are starting to really get into contending windows. You can wait for them to perhaps age out. You move past some of the aging cores that are already very good, like Colorado, Vegas. Maybe you skip them, and it maybe puts you in a better position in a couple of years to be one of the top dogs, not only in the Central, but in the West. You have that potential, especially as, Minnesota, Colorado, Dallas, they all get older and start dropping players. So I don't know, man, the timing for the Jets to maybe think about, how do you time this window and what does it look like going forward, starting with, number 2 overall and maybe pick, 9 along with it. It feels like it could be the start of something real special in a few seasons. It will require some pain and sacrifice, and I think fans are going to have to be patient. But I think at the end of it, you could come out with a really, really special team that starts to look a lot like what made the Jets in 2017, 2018 such a special, scary team. Would love to hear your thoughts, though. I know a lot of you are kind of in mixed opinions on this. I know that we're all kind of waiting with bated breath to see what the Jets even do. I want to talk about Pagnotta's framing on Hellebuyck, because he kind of goes a little back and forth, and he sort of hedges his bets, right? But I think there's an interesting grain in there that's kind of worth unpacking when it comes to the timing of when Hellebuyck might want to leave if things don't work. But we'll talk about all of that coming right up. If you've got a sweet tooth, you know how tough it is to find the perfect treat without all the sugar. That's why Cotton Candy 5-Hour Energy Shot brings that nostalgic flavor back in a whole new way. As somebody who likes to do powerlifting and stuff, I can tell you that caffeine is one of the most helpful things when you need that extra pump. And 5-Hour Energy delivers a great, tasty caffeine boost with 0 sugar to help you get back in the game. Maybe you're just somebody who's an office worker and you have the 3 p.m. slump hitting. 5-Hour Energy can come in with a great boost to help get you back focused and ready to finish out your day as you get closer to that hollowed 5 p.m. time. The flavor of 5-Hour Energy Cotton Candy brings back the sweet, fruity, vanilla, nostalgic flavor you loved as a kid, but without any of the guilt, and in a portable, compact form that you can take with you anywhere. Bring on the sweetness with Cotton Candy 5-Hour Energy Shots, available online now at 5hourenergy.com or on Amazon. The NBA playoffs are here, and every possession matters. If you're looking to get even closer to the action, FanDuel has a great offer to get you started. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. That's right, turn $5 into $150 in bonus bets just for getting started. FanDuel is the best way to follow along with the action. It can help you check stats, trends, and matchups before they even hit, and you can stay up to date with the latest developments in-game as things are happening so you can make the most informed bet possible. The FanDuel app is always safe, secure, and easy to use, and it can help you follow some of the most underrated players as they make their playoff runs, or you can track your favorite stars. No matter what you're into, FanDuel is here to make your playoff experience as engaging and fun as possible. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel, play your game. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for rejoining us as we're chatting a little bit about all of the Hellebuyck stuff. That is going to be, until this thing resolves, really the biggest focus, I think, for the summer. Now, David Pagnotta, who had the Sharks rumor, was talking about the trade market for goalies and Hellebuyck specifically, right? His framing is kind of more on the patient side, where he said Helly may be willing to give it, another season, right? But if things don't go well this coming year, that's when the separation happens. I think it's interesting because, despite saying that, he also shouted out specifically the Florida Panthers, which is, the team we've talked about a lot. Bobrovsky hasn't yet committed. He wants to stay, but he's asking for a contract that's on the larger side. And with what Pagnotta said, which is he's looking for Marchand money, that's a kind of contract structure that you honestly could fit both Helly and Bob in a way doing something like that. If Bob takes less money over longer term, gives him more guarantees over time, even if the initial cash hit is a little bit lower. Where I kind of sit though with all of this is because of the opportunity and the timing, I just don't know that Hellebuyck is going to wait another year. He knows that the team is not going to be good next year. I mean, there's no really getting around that. It'd take a minor miracle for something to really reshape this roster that makes them competitive. And unless there's a team out there that's really stupid and does something insane and just gifts the Jets a top-line center, a top-line wing, something along those lines, I don't know how this team possibly gets to a level to where you'd feel comfortable about their playoff chances and their ability to actually win in the playoffs. The Jets weren't really playoff ready even in previous years. Last year, they were a President's Trophy team. They barely beat the Blues and then kind of got humbled a bit by the Stars. Close as some of those games were, I mean, it was clear that the Jets were a tier below some of those contending teams. And then look what happened to the Stars. They were made to look even, less like a contender than the Jets were. So all that to say, Winnipeg is in a really difficult spot with Helly. And I just don't know that this idea of him waiting around is realistic. I think if it was maybe when he was 30 or 31 and he hadn't just won gold at the Olympics, I might feel differently about this. I might say he's willing to give it more time. But you think about every move the Jets have made the last 3 or so years, you look at their trade deadlines, you look at how they've approached things. If you're Helly, you really don't have a reason to be confident that Chevy has something special up his sleeve. And, with the Panthers having a pretty clear opening for a goalie vacancy, I just think so much aligns for him to potentially put in that trade request and start that process now. There will be other teams bidding. I think there will be contention. And what Pagnotta said was, The Jets want to keep Ellie and they love him. They want him to stick around so they can win with him. But, they're going to listen, not, willingly or openly in that sense where they're excited to move him. But if a team wows them with an offer, there's an opening. And teams are sort of taking the note that, you might be willing to check in. This might be a time to make a play for Hellebuyck and see what you can get out of the Jets. And I think that is telling. That's a shift in the messaging than what we've heard in previous years. The fact that teams think about this as a chance in a window to maybe lure Hellebuyck out of there is new. I mean, that's something that hasn't happened before. We've kind of talked about this for a while, that I think that there was this real risk of this happening. Will the Jets answer calls? I don't know. I'm sure Chevy will do due diligence. I think he's going to be as hardline as he possibly can. That is kind of something that I think the Jets are going to be very firm on, especially with a franchise star. But Hellebuyck does kind of hold the cards here. If he hears one of these teams is asking about him and he thinks the offer makes sense for everyone involved, he might lean on these negotiations. I don't know how much he's really going to hear about what's going on, but, we all know that tampering probably does happen behind the scenes. It's not really shocking. Would Hellebuyck potentially get wind of a team's interest in him? And, would he be willing to try and help things along? Very possible. The Jets may even just ask him, hey, can you be flexible about this? And here's what we're trying to make happen. What are you willing to move for? So, I think this could be a very interesting process, but I would push back a little bit on the idea that Hellebuyck is going to wait. I think, he already kind of sees how next year's going. I think he saw how the Jets tried to address gaps this past summer. He saw them sign Nyquist, Taves, Koepke, and Pearson, and he's probably like, yeah, that's kind of the territory that we live in. That's the free agent talent the Jets can acquire. They don't really sign much else beyond that. So given the Jets probably don't have enough to make a trade for a big roster player, I think he's going to kind of read the tea leaves and make that choice a little more aggressively. And look, I could be 100% off base, right? But based on where all of this is going and just the projections really kind of putting the Jets behind the eight ball here, I just don't see how Hellebuyck feels convinced by what's happening. And if he waits another year, that's another opportunity for him that he could have won a cup kind of by the wayside. And at the stage of his career where he's at, he just had knee surgery, one of the first he's ever had. He's 33. There is a clock that's ticking, especially for him. And the Stanley Cup ring really is for him kind of like that Mount Rushmore moment that he needs to really solidify his legacy. Is it fair? Compared to what his other accomplishments are? Maybe not. He's already done so much to get himself in the Hall, but we all know that you are sort of measured by what happens in the playoffs. And I think with Hellebuyck especially, that remains the thing that everyone holds against him. I'm sure that sort of weighs on him personally. And so it just seems like this kind of is the moment where he, feels this is a fair jumping off point. He's given the team a fair bit of time. Maybe this is where he thinks, looking at what's out there, looking at the situation that's kind of in front of him, Winnipeg, isn't going to be competitive. He has a chance to go elsewhere and win. Maybe this is where that bridge is kind of crossed. I know what Pagnotta was saying, but I don't know, man. It just seems to line up too neatly for both parties to bid farewell to what has been one of the most fruitful relationships for the Jets they've ever had. It does kind of hurt that it feels like it's coming to an end, but, out of every bad or every good thing that ends, perhaps something new can spring out of it. And that's what I'm hopeful for with a big return in whatever the Hellebuyck trade looks like. You come away with 9th overall, Lundell, something else, you feel pretty good about the return. It solves a lot of needs for the Jets. It starts the rebuild of this core. You get some really key pieces to kind of build around, and I think it puts the Jets in the longer term on the path towards being an elite team down the road. But we all know how that can be. Tricky process, lots to navigate. In the meantime, we're all kind of watching the NHL playoffs. We are getting closer to the conference finals and the finalists who are going to be in these matchups. We just had another elimination yesterday. Want to talk about what these matchups are shaping up to be and who might emerge victorious coming right up. Have you ever opened up your bank account and thought to yourself, where the heck is all my money going? Well, you're not alone. Keeping track of subscriptions, spending, and bills can get super overwhelming super fast. That's where Rocket Money comes in, helping you take control of your finances all in one place. It tracks all your subscriptions in one spot and helps you cancel the ones you don't need with just a few taps. It automatically categorizes your spending so you can actually see where your money's going, and you can set budgets, get alerts, and stay on top of upcoming bills. It just makes everything feel more organized and gives you a clearer picture of all of your finances and needs day to day. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that truly helps find and cancels unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spendings, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/lockedon. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are heading into the conference finals just about. There is still one matchup remaining. Montreal and Buffalo are still going at it. Montreal has taken a 3-2 series lead. They've got a chance to close it out this coming weekend, so big deal for them. They continue to hold the Canadian hope of a cup drought being busted. Do I think they're going to do it this year? Probably not. I think they're very fun. I think they've been a great team so far. They're also young and raw, and they have to contend with some teams that will be rested, and some of these squads also just have a certain aura and level of experience and skill that they might not be able to match. But I think as an upstart young team, making the conference finals, potentially if you oust Buffalo this weekend, is a huge, huge, huge win. Now, Montreal's reward for beating the Sabres is to then go against the Carolina Hurricanes, who have had like a week off. Carolina has not yet lost a game, so that is a little crazy. Yes, getting through Ottawa and Philadelphia with a clean sweep of both maybe doesn't sound crazy impressive on paper because neither of those teams were amazing, but it is very, very hard to sweep an opponent, much less two of them in a row. To be a perfect 8-0 in the playoffs, pretty dang impressive. And now they're going to go against Montreal, who are one of the few teams that I think gives a team like Carolina fits because they're fast, they have really quick passing, and they love to counter. Now, the Canes are really well built and very deep, and I think adding Ehlers to your top 9 just gives you 3 different matchup lines that Brind'Amour can basically do whatever he wants. The way that he splits things up relatively evenly just makes it so that the top 9 eats up a fairly distributed amount of minutes that gives him different looks, different matchup abilities, different styles of play, and it's really worked a treat. Philadelphia had no answer. The Sens kind of got close at times, but really couldn't close the deal. And now if Montreal advances, they're going to have to really contend with a rested, deep, very annoying Canes team, one that has traditionally not done well in the Eastern Conference Finals, but maybe this is the year that they finally bust the hump and make the cup. On the Western side, we just had VGK beat Anaheim. A little sad about that. I was hoping the Ducks would be a bit of an upset and surprise, but Marner and co. have found a way to just elevate in the playoffs as Vegas often does. We know that that's their habit. They are definitely the underdogs, though. Colorado just beat Minnesota 4-1 in the series, and that is a very scary team. The Avs were actually pretty vulnerable, though. The goaltending wasn't great. Minnesota pushed them to the brink at times. Colorado found those late answers, and I think the whole thing of what I've said about Minnesota from the start ended up coming true. Minnesota leaned on like 6 guys. That got them a lot farther than I thought it would. But inevitably, kind of as we've seen happen with the Jets, if you don't have the depth to support it the way Colorado does, it's not going to matter. And the Avs just had answers where Minnesota couldn't. So I think this is going to be a very fun series. VGK plays a very aggressive, quick style that's super frustrating to contend with. Colorado, though, I don't know, man. I just think this is their year. The cup isn't necessarily theirs to lose. I think it's going to be a little closer than that. But you look at the fact that they've only lost one game on their pathway here to the conference finals. They have had, maybe an extra day's rest over VGK. They're going to be, the top seed here. They're going to have home ice advantage to start. I don't know, man. Just feels like their run to the cup has been foretold for a year, for the entire last few months. Everyone has seen them. We all know what they're capable of. Now they have to go out, earn the paychecks, and get it done. But I think that they do this probably in about 6 games. I think VGK will make it close and even win 1 or 2. But, I would not trust Carter Hart against this Avs offense, especially after what they just did to Wallstedt. Wallstedt really didn't have much of an answer late in that series, and I don't think Hart is either. So hoping Colorado pulls this off. Would really like to see the Knights out. Would be great for them not to be in another Cup Finals, please. Tired of this stupid team. Colorado versus Carolina or Montreal or Buffalo would certainly be a pretty cool Cup Final, not one that you'd expect. I don't know that it's necessarily going to be as easy for the Avs as it sounds like. You get a Canes team that matches up really well against what Colorado's built. Maybe Colorado kind of wins out because they've got those game breakers. But yeah, man, for the first time in a while, I don't know. I actually want to watch the Cup Finals. I'm intrigued by it. We've got some teams that are, kind of returning contenders, but we've got some new names in the mix, and I'm all about some variety for the spice of life. But let me know if you're going to be watching the Cup Finals or if you plan to just ignore it because you hate the teams too much. Drop your Stanley Cup Finals predictions and winner in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at @LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's show, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. We will see you next week with more Jets offseason coverage. So have a blessed weekend. Enjoy your time off. Hope you get some rest. And as always, go Jets, go.